Fahrenheit. My log cabin in North America's farthest west highway point, the ascetic desert of Anchor Point, Alaska. I'm going to do some reading for us tonight, like I always love to do. One second here while I pull up the reading. I hope everyone's doing good. I'd like to give it a few minutes for my brothers and sisters to join in. The first article that I'm going to read for us, coming up in just a second here. Emperor Romanus Diogenes and the Disaster at Manzikert, A History of Pre-Christian and Christian Europe, by Archpriest Vladislav Sipin. After the death of the Emperor Constantine Dukas, his eldest son Michael, who had long passed childhood and entered adulthood, was able to rule on his own. But according to Michael Psellos, his mother, Queen Eudocia, she did not entrust the kingdom to anyone else, and she began to run everything herself and took power into her own hands. A sophisticated and experienced woman, she was able to deal with any business, appointments to posts, civil proceedings, and collection of state taxes. And when the opportunity presented itself, she was able to speak royally. Such a great mind was hidden in Tsarina. She sat among her sons, and they were not petrified with fear and reverence for their mother. This, however, is only partially true, because in making decisions, she followed the advice of the author of this maxim, Michael Psellos, a powerful nobleman, Caesar John Dukas, her brother-in-law. But the dangers threatening the empire along the entire perimeter of its borders incessantly demanded that the supreme power pass into the hands of the emperor in the original meaning of the title, a commander who would not nominally but actually command the armed forces, which, of course, not only the young Basileus Michael, but also his mother Eudoxia, and by the way, Michael Psellos, were not capable of. In the ruling circles, the idea ripened to propose to the Tsarina to marry an experienced military leader and entrust him with power over the armed forces and at the same time the state. Sharing the anxiety about the very existence of the empire, Patriarch John Ziphilinus was ready, for his part, to persuade Eudoxia to take this step, promising to release her from the vow of widowhood to the grave given to her husband on his deathbed. The Tsarina was encouraged to take this step, and the choice she made turned out to be quite independent, personal, and completely unexpected for her entourage. Her chosen one was Romanus Diogenes, who was then 30 years old. He was born in 1039 and was 11 years younger than the Tsarina. Romanus came from the Cappadocian aristocracy, possibly of Armenian origin. The son of the general Constantine Diogenes, who during the reign of Emperor Romanos III was caught in rebellion, threw himself down a steep slope and died. Roman Diogenes began his military service on the Danube border, showing rare courage and outstanding abilities as a military leader, especially distinguishing himself in the war with the Pechenegs. His career was rapid, and during the reign of Constantine Ducas, he became the Westarch and the Duke of Serdicia, a modern capital of Bulgaria. Sofia. After the death of the Emperor Constantine Ducas, he ventured to attempt a coup d'etat, counting on the support of the military elites. Dissatisfied with the rule of the capital's bureaucracy, he was arrested and taken to the capital. When Queen Eudoxia interrogated him, she was struck by his courage and beauty, and instead of sentencing him to death, she confined herself to banishing him to his homeland, Cappadocia. When the decision was made about her second marriage, she summoned Roman from exile to the capital. On her deathbed, her husband, Emperor Constantine Ducas, prompted Eudoxia to take an oath to remain a widow until the end of her life. Patriarch John Xiphilinius released her from this oath so that she could marry Romanus Diogenes, after which she married him on January 1st, 1068. The patriarch performed the coronation of Roman. At the same time, Constantine's sons, Ducas and Eudoxia, retained their royal titles, and Romanus Diogenes swore that he would act in the interest of his minor co-rulers. A protege of the generals, Romanus pushed away from the helm of the government the most influential persons up to that time. Caesar Ducas, who retired to Bithynia after losing his influence, and Michael Psellos, which incurred their hostility, which resulted in Psellos restrained but sarcastic Philippix Eudoxia, believed that by the enthroned one whom she had not destroyed but saved, she would retain all power for herself. And Roman would not even think about anything against her will, but having calculated everything correctly, she did not achieve her goal. For a short time, he feigned submission, and then at once showed his temper. The more she strove to control him and keep the ruler like a lion in a cage, the more he hated the bridle and squinted angrily at the hand that held him. At first, he only muttered irritably through his teeth, and then he began to openly show displeasure. He turned away from the Tsarina, despised the nobles, neglected his advisors, and the incurable disease of the Tsars. Served himself as both an advisor and a mentor. Having penetrated into his disastrous designs, I was worried about the Tsarina and afraid that the state affairs would become upset and agitated. The emperor, as his supporters expected of him, redistributed the expenses of the state treasury, directing the lion's share of them to the maintenance of the armed forces, which he found in a miserable and disastrous state. Setting off in March 1068 on a campaign to the east, after crossing the Bosphorus, he inspected his motley army. Its appearance was depressing, according to John Scalitza. A strange sight was presented by these so famous Roman warriors whose courage subdued the east and the west. There was a modest number of men, and even then they were dressed in rags and depressed by poverty, deprived of weapons, and instead of swords and military shells, they had quivers and axes with them. Horsemen without horses and other weapons. It had been a long time since the Tsars had gone on a campaign, so military men, as those who did not carry out active service, were deprived of their allowance and allowances. They had a timid appearance, had no courage that seemed capable of any large undertakings, and the banners themselves, which did not arouse a loud shout, gloomy and as if tarnished, surrounded by an insignificant number of soldiers, made a painful impression on the viewer. It occurred to me how the Roman army had come to such a state, and what money and what effort it would cost to return it to its former. There is a grain of truth in the reproaches of Psellos to Romanus, who accused him of the army's unpreparedness for confrontation with a strong opponent. The Seljuks, against whom he led it, obviously Romanus Diogenes. He wandered, went to one place and arrived at another, wandered through Syria and Persia, and if he succeeded in doing so, it was to lead his army farther away into the mountains and place it on high hills, to lower it again, to lead it along narrow roads, and by such a clever maneuver to destroy many of his own people. Nevertheless, he returned with a victorious look. But under the pen of another historian, Michael Attaliatus, the course and the outcome of this war looks different. It is surprising and worth mentioning that the Basileus, for 8 days in a row, he pursued the enemy with only one squad, deprived of necessary things in an area waterless and impassable. In autumn of 1068, Romanus Diogenes captured the fortified city of Manbij. After the success, the Romans defeated several detachments of the Seljuks, who were caught in a rapid advance to the west, to the possessions of the empire, which were still preserved in Asia. In the spring of the following year, the emperor went on a campaign to the east, but on the march he was caught by the news of mutiny of a detachment of mercenaries from Italy under the command of Crispinus, and he forced to return to suppress the rebellion. He then had to linger in the capital when the Norman leader, Robert Guiscard, from the Pope, whom the Pope had conferred the title of Duke of Apulia, attacked the last garrisons of the Roman Catapenat in Italy. It was not possible to hold back the onslaught of the Normans on the last stronghold of the Romans in southern Italy. And in 1071, the capital of Catapenat, Bari, fell. A year earlier, the emperor had sent an army to Asia under the command of the emperor's nephew, Isaac Comnenus Manuel. But this time the Romans were defeated by the Seljuks, who then managed to capture the Roman cities of Maznakert and Chona. After the disastrous campaign of Menil Roman, they began to prepare a decisive blow against the Seljuks, aiming the army at Ecbatana and Tehran, the key cities of the Sultanate. In vain, the military commander Joseph Tarkaniot, pointing out the numerous dangers of such an enterprise, proposed to burn the border areas and wait for the Turks there, depriving them of the possibility of reinforcements. The emperor persisted. Having assembled a motley army of 100,000, most of which were mercenaries of different languages, the emperor led it in the summer of 1071 to the east to Armenia towards Lake Van, beyond which lay Iran. Conquered by the Seljuks, the Romans besieged Manzikert, previously occupied by the Muslims, and captured it in early August. But Romanus could not consolidate his success, mainly because his camp and command posts, there were many of his opponents from the Duke clan who dreamed of revenge, and their supporters hostile to the circle of military leaders on whose support Romanus Diogenes, a native of his milieu, relied. In an effort to eliminate the emperor, his opponents without hesitation, they risked the country. At first, however, only the life of Roman himself was attempted. The tent where he slept broke out at night, then the house in which he intended to stay collapsed. They decided to destroy him along with the army, but then they decided to destroy him along with the army. Nikephoros Visalaki, who was entrusted with a reconnaissance, deliberately misled the Basileus and did not know until the last moment that Sultan Alp Arslan was approaching Mazikert with huge forces. Joseph Tarcheniot, having met the Turks, he fled, but not back to Manzikert, but in a completely different direction, which greatly weakened the army of Romanos IV. On the eve of the general battle, moreover, immediately before the battle, a detachment of the allied Bans went over to the enemy. This was partly due to the fact that the Oghuz tribes of Uza and Seljuk spoke the same Turkish language. The general battle of the Romans with the Seljuk Turks took place on August 19 near the walls of Manzikert. Heavy cavalry cataphracts under the command of the emperor himself struck at the enemy's vanguard, crushed his front ranks, and forced him to flee. But fearing an ambush, Roman ordered the soldiers pursuing the enemy to stop at Seljuk camp and retreat. A fatal role in the further course of the battle was played by Andronikos Doukas, who deliberately distorted the order and raised panic in the rear guard. Claiming that the emperor had been killed, hearing about the death of the emperor, the soldiers rushed to flee. The Seljuks struck them near the rear, and the massacre of the Romans began. But the enemies who surrounded the empire, according to Michael Atelioth, did not easily and immediately defeat him. Possessing strategic military experience, familiar with many dangers, he put up strong resistance to the attackers, killing many of them. Finally, he was wounded by a sword in the arm, and then his horse was defeated by an arrow, and he, Diogenes, had to fight on foot. And so, in the evening, completely tired, he resigned himself and became a prisoner. This was the first time in the history of the Roman Empire that the emperor was captured. Constantinople received contradictory information about the fate of Romanus Diogenes. One of the fugitives was the first to come to the capital, spreading the news of the misfortune that had happened. A second arrived for him, a third for a second. Some said that the Tsar had died, others claimed that he had just been taken prisoner, others said that they had seen him wounded and fallen to the ground, and still others that he had been tied up. They themselves were witnesses, being led to the enemy camp. The current situation was discussed in the palace. The advisors, among whom Michael Psellos set out the tone, recommended that the queen take full power upon herself and over her sons, the eldest of whom, Michael, was already a full-grown husband, regardless of whether Romanus was killed or held captive, and so it was decided. Meanwhile, as Psellos himself writes, the leader of the enemy army, seeing the captured Roman Tsar, was not proud of his successes, but was embarrassed by his happiness and reacted to the victory with such prudence that no one could expect from him. He comforted the prisoner, shared a meal with him, honored him, provided guards, freed him from bondage, those whom he named, released all the prisoners he asked for, and finally freed him from captivity. The payment for the release of the royal prisoner was to be 100,000 gold pieces and a concession to the Sultanate of Manzikert and Antioch. Psellos called this gesture of the Sultan the beginning of evil and the main cause of many misfortunes, because Romanus decided that he would easily regain the Roman kingdom and wrote a letter to the Tsarina with his own hand, in which he informed her of everything that had happened to him. A meeting of the Synclitus was held in Constantinople, and at it Psellos insisted on the deposition of Romanus Diogenes, as he himself readily admits. When everyone began to ask for my advice, I replied that Roman should be disposed of, that he should not be allowed into the kingdom, and that a decree should be sent everywhere to remove him from power. To well-founded people, my advice seemed useful, but to others judged otherwise. Among the others was the Tsarina, who was not at all thirsty for the blood of her desperately brave and probably beloved husband. From that time on, she no longer participated in the affairs of state government, which were entrusted to her son Michael. On October 24th, he was proclaimed autocrat, but who acted before and henceforth in everything, at the prompting of his former teacher and longtime advisor Psellos. In the name of Emperor Michael VII, pardon was announced to the disposed Romanus, which, when it reached him, was perceived by him as an insulting mockery. He decided to fight for the throne and began to gather an army. Under the pressure of the government army led by his hater, Andronicus Ducas, who seemed to cherish the dream of ascending the throne, which his father had previously occupied for a short time, a civil war began in which the forces of the opponents were not equal. After being defeated in several battles in the summer of 1072, Romanus capitulated and allowed himself to be taken into custody. Having received from Andronicus Ducas an assurance of personal integrity, but on the way to Constantinople, Diogenes was blinded by being crushed by a shield in some closet. In vain, Roman remembered the promises made to him on behalf of the government. In the absence of an executioner and tools, the execution was carried out by some random person with a thick pole from a tent. 4 times the red-hot iron was immersed in the unfortunate emperor's eye sockets. Roman himself, screaming, convinced his tormentors that his eyes had leaked out. Blind, he was taken to the island of Protus, and there he died in agony soon after, on August 4th. Psellos, surpassing himself, sent a message to the blinded emperor in which he praised his sacrifice as a martyr. God had taken away his eyes because he considered him worthy of the highest light. According to the Byzantine scholar A.A. Vasiliev, the deposition and the elimination of Romanus Diogenes played a fatal role in the history of the Roman Empire. In this year, Byzantium lost southern Italy and the west and signed the death warrant for the dominion of Asia Minor in the east. From that time on, Byzantium ceased to be a world power of the Middle Ages. After the death of Romanus, Queen Eudoxia Macremvolitis retired to a monastery, which she strove for when she was once left a widow, burying her first husband, until she fell in love with the young tyrant whom she had forgiven, as the Romans called the rebellious pretenders to the throne. She remained in the monastery for a quarter of a century, until her death, which followed in the year 1096, devoting herself to fasting, prayer, reading books, scholarly works, which, however, have not been preserved. Archpriest Vladislav Tsipin, January 9th, 2026. Yes, this was written tomorrow. Howdy, everybody. Thanks for joining me. A little bit of stumbling on reading this history of the Byzantine Empire because it's translated from Russian, and sometimes the translations don't go so smoothly, so forgive me. This is just historical, this reading here, but it is talking about Byzantium. I'm old Rite Orthodox, but everyone's welcome. We love everybody here. So the next reading that I'm going to do for us actually, I'm going to do a different reading than this one. About Vupsin and a Repentant Alcoholic. Christmas Wonders by Elena Kurcharenko. I love Christmas very much. I love everything about it. I love hours human waiting for the first star, gingerbread houses, homemade nativity scenes, generous breaking of the fast, duck with apples and powder, outfits for the festive service. I love the Christmas tree. Be sure to be real, lively, fluffy, and fragrant, decorated with tangerines, candies, nuts, toys, and everything shiny. But this isn't the temple. Alas, we can't live at home. We have cats and dogs. There will be other flavors. And most importantly, I love the divine, the birth of the Holy Child into this life of ours, and his birth in the hearts of men, and miracles that are sure to happen on this magical night. And how can they not be? Christ is near. Lonely because harmful. I grew up in an ordinary, unbelieving family, and there was no Christmas in my childhood. It was the New Year, which I did not like. I didn't like him because I believed in Santa Claus for a long time. And then I suddenly realized that that was all a lie. At that time, my parents were on a business trip to Greece, and my sister and I, respectively, were with them. Some kind of New Year came. It was celebrated at the embassy. I remember how with bated breath I was waiting for a real Santa Claus to come out. And a miracle would happen. And he went out only from under the suit. He could see the sneakers of Uncle Vitya, one of the employees. They were conspicuous. I cried long and bitterly, and then I woke up by the accident on the New Year's Eve and saw my dad sneaking up to my bed with a gift. I've been deceived for so many years, and I didn't know about Christmas at all. But when I was probably 12 years old here in Moscow, I met a neighbor at the entrance. I nodded and wanted to pass by. To be honest, I was afraid of her. She was a strange old woman with an eternal black scarf on her head. Lonely. Moreover, I remembered how one of the tenants said, lonely because she must be harmful. Even her holidays are strange. In general, I met her on January 7th. I nodded to her and quickly turned away, but she suddenly touched my sleeve. Happy holiday, dear. Which one? I was surprised. The New Year had already passed a week ago. Once again, disappointing me beyond belief, I was given a chess, and I wanted a live dog. Well, of course, Christmas, she answered, took something wrapped in a napkin from her bag and handed it to me. I put it in my pocket, quickly thanked her, and thought to myself that this grandmother's holidays were as strange as she was. But suddenly I saw her eyes. There was so much love in them and some kind of joy unknown to me. And with my stupid teenage heart, I felt that this grandmother knew something that I did not know. Now I understand why. God was always with her, and she was with him. At home, I unfolded the napkin and saw a gingerbread. I had never eaten such a thing, brown with either a snowman or a bear painted on it, I don't remember. I took a bite. It was a new taste for me. Now I know that there is ginger, cinnamon, vanilla. But then for me, it was the smell of Christmas, sweet and joyful. And Christmas itself looked to me like the eyes of that grandmother, warm eyes in which there was no loneliness. And I also felt the warmth from them. Years passed. I found myself in the church. There was already an adult who had gone through fire, water, copper pipes, and much more. But Christmas for me smelled sweet, that gingerbread. And no one is alone in this night. Christ is born. Glorify him. And the story was told to me recently by an acquaintance. We talked a little, but I felt very sorry for her. Her son has been drinking heavily for a long time. After marriage, he began. He lost his job and somehow quickly rolled. He was kicked out by his wife, forbidding him to see the children. They divorced. He lived with his mother. She tried to reason with him as best she could, but it did not end well. Thank God he did not beat her, but he could scold her strongly, and he drank just as heavily, and he was not going to quit. It was Christmas, she said. I went to the service and my son stayed at home. She threw away all the alcohol, but she knew that this would not stop him. An adult, there were friends. He will find it if he wants. I'd prayed for him before, tearfully a lot. She made vows, traveled to holy places, but nothing changed. And then she came to our church, and on the left, next to the entrance, they always put a nativity scene. And I felt a jerk. I fell on my knees in front of him, right into the snow, and sobbed. Lord, while you came into the world to save us all, save thou my foolish son. Most pure, while you yourself are the mother, you are holding the baby in your arms, help me. A man came up and began to lift me up. I thought that it had become bad. She went out to work. Communion had already begun, and I was still crying. The priest even scolded me. It was a holiday, and I was crying. She returned home after the service, and everything is scattered there. Only her son is sober. He sits in the middle of the mess and also cries. Mom, forgive me, he said to her. It turned out that he began to look for a drink, rushed around like an animal, swore, threw everything around, and then it seemed to click in my brain that he was no longer human. For the sake of vodka, I'm ready for everything. He lost his family and doesn't care. I would only like to have a drink. And he also realized that more than half of his drunken friends are dead. Some are in prison, and he will finish in the same way, my friend said. He never went to church, but thank God, even when drunk, he did not blaspheme. He swore at me, but not at the Lord. He came into my room, stood in front of the icons, and asked help. I didn't even ask God, not the mother of God. I didn't know who it was, simply help. The woman's son no longer drank. I didn't want to. It didn't pull. He got a job, returned his family. He rarely enters the church, but he does. And the mother of God does not get tired of thanking God. And the mother does not get tired of thanking God. And I think that the Lord heard not only her fervent motherly prayer, but also one word from her son, help. Such is the Lord's love for us, and such a Christmas miracle. Christ vupsin and pupsin. And I saw the story with my own eyes. Then a 5-year-old boy disappeared in our courtyard during the Christmas service. Mother rushed around the church, but there was a wall. There was a sea of people. She rushed around the courtyard, ran out even onto the avenue, and sobbed out loud. Not only the parishioners were looking for the boy, but also our already tipsy homeless people who had difficulty getting up from their seats. A security guard ran back and forth. The police officers also were on duty at our place and joined in, but he was nowhere to be found. Not your sket, a voice suddenly rang out. This was said by one of our beggars, Yura. He unfortunately has already died. And he pointed his finger to the very nativity scene in front of which my friend prayed for her son. There, hidden, the boy was sitting. His mother rushed to him with tears. Yura proudly looked around him. One of the parishioners even slipped money to the homeless man, a reward. Why did you go there? The woman asked her son. I spoke with Jesus. I asked him not to quarrel with Dad anymore, and he gave him whoopsin and pupsin. They're such harmful caterpillars from Lutnik. I looked closer next to the manger, however. There were plush Vupsin and Pupsin. You dreamed of them so much, she gasped. And then she stopped. The kid decided to give an expensive gift to the same little Christ so that he would reconcile his father and mother. Bells rang, festive fireworks sparked in the sky. We all watched and admired. We are already going to our Karlampieva side to break the fast, and then I noticed that the woman with the child again. A man was walking towards them. He came up, was silent, and hugged, and they smiled. I looked at him and smiled too, and Christ was looking at them from the manger, smiling, and the funny Vupsin and Pupsin smiled next to him. I didn't think so, though, and so it was. Elena Kucharenko. I love you all so much, and God loves you so much more than I can ever express. Yesterday was our Russian Christmas. I got to go to services last night. But I didn't get to go to a lot of the services that I wanted to this week. But I had to do something that was important. And I know God understands. And God's given me this gift. And I'm so grateful for it. It's hard not to cry. I wasted so many years of my life working with people that just seemed to hate me. Were always out to destroy me no matter what I did. And the better the work I did, the more they hated me. The more I knew how to do, the more they hated me. And I'm so blessed now to be able to be around people that I can help, that see that I care. And I think things are changing for the better. And I know it's only from God. And thank God for all these gifts that he's given me, an unworthy sinner. On his holiday. God's blessed us all with so much. And we need to always put our trust and our faith in him. And if we find ourselves doubting God, which seems like foolishness if we think about it, it's foolishness to look at this earth, all the creatures in this earth, the mountains, the trees, the flowers, everything. And to not see God in all of it, to not see the light of God in the eyes of everything that we see. He's always with us. We need to do better, to have more faith in him and follow his command to love each other. Love is the father of all the other virtues. If you want to be kind, first have love. If you want to be compassionate, first have love. If you want to be generous, first have love. Every virtue begins with love. So my hope is for this year that everything we do, we can do it with love. It doesn't hurt us to give grace. God has given us this bank account, so to speak. God's given us this mountain of wealth. And sometimes it doesn't make sense to us because it's not this earthly wealth. It's not silver or gold, but it's worth more than silver or gold. God's given us so much grace that we can give grace to undeserving people because we can hand it out as much as we want. We can pour grace out on our enemies as much as we want. We have an endless supply of it. We can pour out love, even on our enemies, on all those that we think don't deserve. God's given us so much grace and love. We can pour it out beyond our wildest dreams onto our enemies and all those that hurt us. Mercy. God's given us mercy in so much abundance that we can't even fathom how much is in our account of this mercy, this love, and this grace. And it doesn't matter if the people that we give it to are deserving of it or not. We have so much. Why would we not want to give it to them? Why would we not want to give so much love and mercy to grace even to the undeserving? God looked at us and saw that we were sinners. And he knew that we were undeserving. But what did he give us? Look at all that he gave us. And he asks us to give this mercy, this love, and this grace, to practice all the virtues, not just to people who treat us well or like us, to those that hate us, to those that want to condemn us to death, to those that want to destroy us, to those that want to burn us, to dismember us, to torture us, to invade our country, to rob our homes, to kill our families. Those people. He wants us to give this mercy, this love, and this grace even to those people. If God didn't give mercy and grace to people that hated him, that wanted to destroy him, that tortured his body, that tortured him ruthlessly, then none of us could ever be forgiven, and none of us would ever make it. Even those of us that think we are good, because we're not. We're all wretched and unworthy sinners, and it's only by God's mercy and his grace that we receive all things. I love you all, brothers and sisters. Thanks for joining me on this one. I might be back and do another reading here in a little bit. I need to drink some coffee or something. It's been so dry out. I'm stumbling with my reading a little bit. So I'm going to take maybe some hot tea or some coffee and try to get where I can read a little bit clearer again. Maybe I'll be back. But give your love and your mercy and grace. Just do it this year. Just do it. View every time that someone says something bad to you, dump the love on them. Just dump heaps of love. Take buckets of love and mercy and grace and just deluge them in it. Let them think you're weird. Who cares? Be a fool for Christ. Don't be afraid of what the world thinks. I love you all. God bless.